Okay. So the topic for this week's design lecture is images and layouts. Before we jump into lecture, we have some quick announcements. Sorry, I think my computer is kind of slow. Gosh, why is it not moving? Okay, yeah, announcements. So homework 4 and lab 4, they were due. So because the Google form that is used for turning assignments had like a limit for the number of like file submissions, everything is now submitted via a link. So make sure that when we grade the assignments that we're able to view the link that you share. Otherwise, you guys will not be getting credit for your assignment. In terms of assignment grades, so I made a Piazza post about this already, but in case you didn't see, if you want to know about your grades for any specific assignment for this class, please email your assigned cohort TA or instructor because we no longer have the portal. So you guys are not able to see the grades as they come out, like as we grade them. So if you want to know like how you did on, for example, like homework 3 or something like that, you would have to email your assigned cohort and TA. So they'll tell you like individually. In terms of overall grade, so again, like if you want to see your overall grade, you should also email your assigned cohort TA. Yeah, there's no like portal or like place where you can view your grades right now. So the most efficient way right now is just to email your assigned cohort TA. Midterm project. So the project check-in, which is worth 4 points, is due this Thursday, October 7th, before lab section. So please try to get your project checked off during any of the office hours that are posted on Piazza, because we know that like a lot of the TAs had Friday office hours before. We have told them to change their office hours to before Thursday or on Thursday. So that way we can accommodate people who want to get checked off for the project before the deadline. So make sure to check out the office hours post for more information about the new updated office hour times. And then the final project, sorry, this should say the midterm project. The midterm project is due on Tuesday, October 19th. And then the submission link is listed on the slide right here. And again, it's due on October 19th. And I believe that is 11:59 p.m. Pacific time. And last announcement is if you emailed ask@wdd.io recently, you might have realized that you didn't get a response from us. And that's because the portal was down, the DNS, like email forwarding, wasn't set up correctly. So basically every email that was sent was essentially lost during that time that we didn't fix the email forwarding. So now good news is that it works. So if you email ask@wdd.io, it should actually go to my email. So I'll get your email if you email that address. So yeah, if you have any questions or like concerns, that is not like, I guess you wouldn't make a private Piazza post about it and then you would just like email us instead, and I would try to respond as soon as possible. Yeah, so like if anyone has DSP recommendation or DSP accommodations that they want, you should email ask@wdd.io instead of making a Piazza post about it. Okay, moving on to the actual lecture content now. So the topic is kind of split into 2 sections. So the first part is images and the second part is layouts. So as a warm-up, let's talk about some examples, some website examples that use a lot of images. So this website, I believe it belongs to like a music artist or a band. I don't know which artist this is, but yeah, if you look at their, so actually let me click on this link. If you go to their website, you'll notice that it's very unusual in terms of the types of images that they use. It's like purposefully bad in a way, like a lot of the images are super like hard on the eyes. As you can see, the fonts are like everywhere. The icons are kind of random too. Like you can see like random things floating around. And then if you keep scrolling, it just kind of gets progressively worse. It just kind of like ruins your eyes at a certain point. So as you can see, they use a lot of images. They have very tacky typography, lots of graphics and just like laid like everywhere on this website. But even though like it might seem bad from like a UI UX perspective, it's purposeful. So like it's trying to show like a specific personality and this like sort of quirkiness that relates to this musical artist. And it has sort of like a 90s throwback aesthetic. So it's like very counter like modernism, if that makes sense. Yeah, so as you can see, if it keeps going down, like it just gets worse and worse. Like I don't know what's happening with these skeletons and these fire images, but they all kind of contribute to this overall image of, you know, like very like quirky and like tacky and sort of contrarian style that this artist has. Yeah, I don't know what is going on. But yeah, if you like play around with that website, you'll see how like random and strange it is. But yeah, that kind of goes to show like how important images are when it comes to like defining the personality of a website. On the other hand, if you go to the next slide, so we have the Postmates website. And as you can see, it's like completely the opposite. It's like very, let me open this up. Like in comparison to the previous one, it's very like modern. The typography is very sans serif, and the images that they use are like, it makes sense, right? Like Postmates is a food delivery service, so they use a lot of like pizza, French fries images on it. And they also have a very nice usage of negative space. Sorry, the website's taking a long time to load. My computer is really slow. But yeah, as you can see, they have like a lot of negative space around this sort of like main content on the front page. And like the text, it like really stands out. And like the yellow is also a very interesting color. I feel like a lot of websites, they don't usually use yellow as their main like color palette. They tend to use more calming colors like blue, green, etc. But like for some reason, this works really well for them. Like I think it's also the fact that like yellow kind of corresponds to like food and like fast food. So it kind of comes together as a very cohesive like style and theme for their website, which is really nice. And as I said before, like the use of negative space, it really focuses the attention onto the action items in the middle of this page. So like the search bar for like entering the delivery address, stuff like that. And it really like it gets the point across to the user who lands on this website. Okay, so moving on to image uses, let me present again so you guys can see. So the usage of images is really important to sort of like, I guess, bring more information to the user on the website. As people say, like an image or a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So images are super, super useful in that sense. As you can see, like this example, I think it's called Ueno, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. They're sort of like a design consultancy organization, I believe. So if you go onto their website, they have a lot of examples of how like putting an image there conveys so much more information than just having like text. Especially because they do a lot of like design oriented projects. So it makes more sense for them to include images of the actual product rather than like having a bunch of like paragraph text explaining like what they did for the project. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward for websites that like showcase the product. It makes more sense to place a lot of images that actually show the product to the user. So it's a lot more visually communicative. The next sort of like usage of images comes to play with like, for example, like movie websites. For example, like here you see that a lot of the images are organized into thumbnails. So for each movie, there's the actual like movie poster or thumbnail, and then there's just the title and the genre. And I feel like that pretty much like encompasses all the information that you really need to know for each image or for each movie. So again, like images are super powerful. Like you don't need to put that much text. You can just put an image there and people immediately know like what that item stands for. So kind of going more into detail about like thumbnails. So thumbnails is basically describing, or the definition of thumbnails is a small representation of a larger image, and it's usually intended to make it easier and faster to manage a group of larger images. So here we have two different layouts for thumbnails. So on the left side, we have masonry, and that's kind of like a waterfall layout. So if you guys have used Pinterest before, you know that like they've kind of championed this like masonry thumbnail layout, and it has been made hugely popular by Pinterest itself. So basically for the masonry layout, it places elements in the optimal position based on the available vertical space, and it reduces a lot of unnecessary gaps. For example, like if an image is really tall, like you'll probably match it with a shorter image next to it or like on the bottom of it. And so it utilizes a lot of the space really efficiently. And then it tries to form like equal sized columns. So the width of the columns you notice are the same. It's just that the vertical height of the images are all different from each other. So this is a really nice layout that's used for image thumbnails, listing a bunch of posts and products. The pros of using this masonry layout is that it shows the entire image, like with respect to its height, right? So if you want to showcase items of various sizes, this is really useful. But the con is that images that are taller in height, they will get more like prominence on the website. And so it's up to you to decide like whether or not you want taller images to have more significance in your website, or you'd rather have each image be of equal importance with respect to each other. On the right side, we have a very standard grid layout, and this is what you'd see in websites like Instagram. So even though the images are like the raw form of the images are of different sizes, the grid layout kind of forces the images to all be the same square dimensions. So all the images, like you would have to crop into a square before you upload it onto Instagram. So because everything is very standardized in terms of the dimensions, the layout ends up looking a lot cleaner and more aligned with each other. So that's the pro of using the grid layout. But the con is that if you have like a really big image or like an image that's like very much not a square shape, and you're forced to crop that image into a square shape, and then you're going to lose a lot of, I guess, important parts of the image, especially if it's like a super tall or super wide image. So yeah, it will not be ideal for images that you want to upload to your website where their focal point, like the center or like the main important part of the image is not located in the center of the image, because when you crop it, it's going to focus on the center, but if the most important part of your image is not in center, then it's going to sacrifice that. Okay, so these are some other examples of thumbnail layouts. So on the left side, we have the justified grid. So this is kind of like the masonry layout, but the opposite axis. So with masonry, we have like the same width for each column, but it's just that the vertical height is different. For a justified grid, instead, we have the same height, or yeah, so we have the same height or same like row height for each image, but instead each image spans its entire width. So it's basically the opposite of masonry. And it helps maintain the aspect ratio for its width, but in terms of height, it's going to be resized. So this is more useful if you want to use a lot of like horizontal images. So like the more wide the image is, the more space it takes up on the website, and thus the more important or significant it has. So if that's like what you're going for, then the justified grid layout is the best for you. On the other hand, if you want to use sort of like a grid layout, but have the images still maintain all their aspect ratio dimensions, then you use the standard grid format. So whereas the previous grid format, you have all of them being cropped to the exact same like square dimension, the standard grid layout, it keeps the original dimensions of the image. So as you can see, like the very first one, it's a wider image, but it still appears as a wider image, even though the entire space that's occupied by this item is the same as all the other items. So this is nice if you want to include info underneath each pic, because you can resize the image to like whatever you want, as long as it fits within the dimensions of the item itself. It's a bit, I would say, like a bit more ugly in terms of like all the images are very like not consistent with each other. Like the heights and the widths are all very different, and so it might come off as a bit messy. But as you can see, like on this website, like it's a gallery of like a lot of scenery, like naturey pics. And so it's important that they don't like sacrifice the original aspect ratio of the images. So that's probably why they opted for the standard grid layout. If you don't want to use images, you can always resort to using icons. So this is an example of the AUI for like an app. So as you can see, they use a lot of icons here, and icons are similar to images in the sense that they also provide a very like visual guide to the user, and it helps draw attention to a lot of action items and content of the website or app that you're using. Sometimes people do go a little overboard with icons, so it's really important you should balance your usage of icons with the usage of text so that you're not like over cluttering your app with too many icons. Otherwise, that's basically just going to distract the user, and all the like actionable items that you want to draw their attention to will essentially be like scattered, and so they won't know like what to actually click on. But overall, icons help make information less intimidating, and it kind of breaks it up easily. So like as you can see here on the main screen, there's like a lot of different categories, and so the icon kind of like conveys that category, like the meaning of that category to the user very clearly, without any like additional descriptions. So it's really nice, and it kind of simplifies your app a lot in terms of the UI without having to use any like real images. So a lot of websites that tend to go for like a more modern feel tend to use a lot of icons in their app. So this is an example of a website that uses a lot of like graphics. So not exactly icons, but they use a lot of graphics. And as you can see, like the graphics kind of brings a very like warm and organic feel to this website. And especially because this website is kind of championing like organicness, or like, I guess like healthy food or whatever, like having these graphics also kind of matches with that theme. And so it makes the overall website very like homey, very friendly and comforting. And the illustrations really bring that out to the user. Humans tend to respond and process visual data better than any other types of data. So the first thing that people really look at when they reach your website is the images and the colors. And as you can see for this website, it's like all the images, they have a really wide variety of colors. They all match really well. So it's not like too blaringly, like, it's not like very saturated. It's not like too like in your face or whatever. It all matches really well. So yeah, I think the important, I guess, like thing you take away from this website example is that emotional appeal is really important, and illustrations and graphics that match your theme really well can really bring out that emotional appeal, because ultimately as human beings, like we are drawn the most to things that like really spike or like stimulate our emotions. So we want to use images on our website to make people feel a certain way, and then thus drive them towards making certain actions on your website or app. Okay, now let's try to get a little technical about images, specifically the types of images that are existing on the internet, and also like how you can use those images for different purposes. So the two most common and basic image formats out there are JPEG and PNG. So JPEG works really well for like natural image types. So if you're someone who's really into photography, JPEG is usually better for that. But the problem is for JPEG, it's prone to deterioration as you save and edit often, and I'll show you like in one of the next slides how that happens. And it's also another pro of JPEG is that it's lightweight compared to PNG. So if you want to like save a lot of space and storage on your device, then JPEGs are better than PNG if you want to store images. And as I said, it's best for like natural image types and like photography purposes. So like large images such as backgrounds, like if you're using like a wallpaper on your computer or something, JPEG is probably the best format for the image that you want to use. And then on the other hand, PNG, one of the biggest advantages of using PNG is that it supports transparency. So maybe you've noticed this like throughout doing school projects or whatever, but sometimes when you like download a logo or like some sort of icon and you realize that there's actually like stuff in the background, like there's sometimes like a white background or sometimes a non-white background, but you're like, oh, I thought this icon or logo was transparent, but it wasn't. So PNG is able to like accommodate for transparent backgrounds, whereas JPEG doesn't. So if you want to like add an icon or logo to your website, PNG is the way to go because it kind of gets rid of that ugly white stuff around your like images and like logos and icons. It's also better at lossless compression. So while JPEG kind of tends to deteriorate over time as you like save and edit often, PNG preserves the quality of the image a lot better. But because of the transparency and the lossless compression features of PNG files, they are a lot more heavyweight than JPEG just because they have like these advantages to them. So they do take up generally more space and more storage on your device. But like if you want to keep that transparency and like compression advantages, then it's, I think, worth it to have PNG files. So while JPEG is good for large images, PNGs are good for small images such as thumbnails and icons and images with transparent backgrounds. I think another fact that I found interesting was that PNG8, so I think it's like a version of PNG files. They used to be like GIF files in the sense that they only supported 256 colors, which like might seem a lot to you, but actually now they can support 16 million colors. So yeah, they are like super high quality now, and you can see like a wide variety of colors in PNG files, whereas before in the previous iterations, you were only able to see 256 colors, which is honestly still a lot. And like for a lot of images, you honestly don't need that many colors to be shown anyway, but it's just nice that like they've evolved so far that like you can now accommodate for 16 million colors in one single PNG image. Okay, so this slide kind of shows what I was talking about when I mentioned like how JPEG images sort of deteriorate over time as you save and edit it more. I don't know if you guys can see on this slide right here, but like compared to the first save, the 50 saves one, like you can see there's some sort of like pixelation going on, like the colors are a bit more dull if you look at like the lights of the buildings. So it's really small, the difference between like the first save and the 50 saves, but if you're trying to like show a very big image on your website, and it might make a difference to your user. Like they might notice that this is a lot more pixelated than the first one. Yeah, I think it's really obvious to see when you look at the sky behind the buildings. Like you can see there's a lot of like weird lines coming out of the sky, whereas the first save, like the raw image, it's a lot clearer and more smooth. This is sort of like a comic, kind of like illustrating, I guess, the stubbornness of some JPEG users. Honestly, I have not run into people who are like this. So yeah, but essentially like many people think that PNGs are like vastly superior to JPEG. And then like, I guess JPEG users, they like only want to use JPEG. I mean, it's like, I think it's probably the most common file type for images. And as this person is saying, like there's no thinking required, like just use JPEG. You have to use like PNG for like specific illustrations or like icons and graphs and stuff like that. Okay, let's go on to another type of image type or image files, and it's under the animation category. So This is a GIF, and as you can see, like it has multiple frames, so it's kind of just like a lot of images in one image. So a GIF still counts as an image, it's just that it has multiple frames. And as I mentioned before, like GIFs, they only have 256 colors. So the same as like the PNG 8 version. But the good thing about it is that it's very lightweight because there's only 256 colors. And the main purpose of using GIFs is to support animation on your website. So this is really good if you want to bring more like, I guess, like motion or interactivity into your website, you would want to use GIFs. So now moving on to some hella cool examples. So this is a website that really utilizes a lot of graphics, and it kind of keeps the user very engaged, and it has a very like cheerful and like delightful feel to it. And they also use like a lot of GIFs. So actually, let me try and click on it so that you guys can see the animation that's going on. So as you can see, like when it first loads, like there's so much like very cool like animations going on, and they're all in the form of like graphics. So actually, they're not really GIFs, I would say, like because they're not like frames of images. It's more like animated graphics, which is actually very different. But as you can see, like the whole process of like loading the website, it just kind of like makes the user very like happy. Like it's very like, it shows a lot of creativity for the user. And I mean, because this is kind of like a French design, what was it again? Like a French creative website or something like that, a web studio. It kind of conveys that sort of like feel to the user by the usage of all of these graphics and animations. And then the next one here is another sort of example of animated UI. So as you can see, like let me full screen this. As that vertical line kind of moves from the left to the right side, you can see like the graphic in the back like change colors from like daytime to nighttime. So generally, I think the usage of a lot of these like animated graphics kind of conveys the feeling that like your app is very well designed and it's very intentional. And I don't know, sometimes when I use these kind of apps, I'm like, oh, it feels like I'm playing a game because like there's so much like animation going on and it makes it a lot more fun and engaging. Whereas if you're just using like a static website or a static app with no like animations whatsoever, you're gonna be like, oh, this is kind of boring. It's basically like reading a book. Or, like I guess like all this stuff is just like static. Whereas like this is a lot more animated and it's kind of like you're playing a game. The last type of image format is SVGs, and SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. And these are really cool, and they're commonly used to, I guess they're used for a lot of icons and graphics that you would want to scale very often. So the good thing about SVGs is that it's made up of vectors, and so vectors are able to be scaled automatically without the loss of quality. And another good thing about SVG is that even though like you think it might be heavyweight, it's actually very lightweight. So it's very easy to like customize the code editor, and it doesn't take up that much space. And they're also very good for animations because they're so scalable, and there's just so much you can do with vectors. And for anyone who uses Adobe Illustrator, you can export them directly from that software. So this is an example of what an SVG kind of looks like on a website. So as you can see, there's like a lot of numbers here, and that's because everything is in the form of a vector. So you can see that there's like ellipses, there's paths, and then with each path, there's like a bunch of values. Honestly, I'm not too sure what each of those mean because I don't really code SVGs, but this is like a really, really advanced form of like graphics. Like I think usually websites just copy and paste it into the website, but make sure that no matter how much you restart window or your browser window, like it will preserve the same like quality. So I think SVGs are really nice if you are like a super, or if you're like a website who's like super nitpicky about like preserving the quality. And yeah, like the quality of your image at any resolution or size. Okay, so I think you should put in this example to kind of show you guys like a past student's work for this decal. I believe this is for the final project that they did. So ultimately, this lecture is kind of to inform you guys of the power of using images and graphics in your websites. So once I open this website, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. So this person really used like space and images like very effectively. So as you can see, like there's all of these like graphics, and she actually drew all of these herself, which is super talented and really cool. And actually a lot of students who have taken this decal have done the same thing. And as you can see, it just kind of really brings out like a very like engaging and comforting feel to the user. Like when you hover over this cup of like lemon tea or whatever, it shows up like a text above it, and it also spins. And as you can see, there's also sort of like a drop shadow too. Yeah, so for all of these like graphics that she made, it's very like, it's very simple, but it conveys the message really well. And there's also like a sort of interaction that happens whenever you hover over that graphic. So you guys can like go visit her website and like see and play around with like the components on the website. And maybe you guys can even like replicate this for your final projects. A lot of people use like Photoshop or Illustrator to make these graphics, and then they just kind of export it into their website. So yeah, this kind of shows you like how like talented people are in terms of like making graphics for their website from scratch, and then being able to incorporate them into their website in a very effective way. Some more information about image use. So generally, when you're using images, you want to try to use images that are relevant to the context. So don't use an image just because it looks nice. Like you have to pay attention to what message you're trying to convey with that image. So every image should have a very clear and functional purpose. And try to avoid using very like purely decorative images, like images that only look good but don't actually tell anything for your website. So yeah, in general, just use predictive visuals that have a very strong relationship with the goals that you want to satisfy with your website. And just like any other element of your user interface, you want to be able to test those images for usability. So this is sort of an example of how a website uses images to their advantage and how that kind of relates to the focal point of the website. So here, as you can see, everything is sort of centered. They have like a background image, and then they have text on top of it, as well as a button. So the image itself, it uses negative space really well. Like there's a leaf on the top right, but besides that, most of the content in the image is centered. And because of that, it like draws a lot of attention to the get started button in the middle. So when you're using images, you're trying to like limit the distractions that the user has when they're visiting your website. Like you don't want to make people guess what the point of the image is. Like it should really bring some sort of like meaning to your website. And you also want to limit the number of objects and distraction in the image. Like I said, there's like barely anything in this image. It's just mainly like some like decoration on the top right, and then kind of like the product itself in the middle. And there's just like a person's hand holding that product. So it's really, really simple, very minimalist, and it draws a lot of attention to the focal point, which is located in the center of this page. So yeah, I think this goes without saying, try to avoid poor quality images. Like for example, this image right here, like when you resize the image, or like the right image is clearly like poor quality, right? Like the aspect ratio is not correct. The pixelation is just, it makes it really hard to read the text. And the minion itself, kind of looks demented because it's like so pixelated. So yeah, when you're picking images, like try to go for the best quality image that you can find. HD is sort of thinner nowadays, and it's better to just not show anything rather than use like a very poor quality image. So if you don't know like how an image looks on different devices, it's pretty easy to just like test it on like different resolution sizes across different platforms in your browser to see if your image looks good on different devices and for different like aspect ratios and resolutions and stuff like that. But yeah, in general, try to avoid using images that are super pixelated and like obviously don't have the original aspect ratio that you want. Okay, so when it comes to stock photos, the answer is preferably not. So don't use stock photos on your website. I think that's like a general rule that people say because stock photos are like stock photos. They don't really have a context to them. Like a lot of professional websites tend to use stock photos and it's like, it kind of communicates like a very cold feeling to the user because it's not actually showing the real individuals that are part of that company or organization, and there's like very little context related to that image, and it makes the website or the company look very generic because stock photos are made to be used by a lot of different people. So if you use a stock photo on your website, that just means that you're also like every other person on the internet. So you really want to use an image that's more genuine. Try to like include actual photographs of people who are connected to your message rather than just random people that are like models for stock photos. So as you can see here, there's like a side-by-side comparison of what a stock photo looks like versus what a real authentic photo looks like. And like, you can probably tell like the left one is very like cold and like, I don't know, like the smile of that guy is kind of creepy to me. Whereas like the right side photo, like the people are like genuinely happy and like you can see they're all like very close to each other and it just communicates such a more like warm feeling to the user who like stumbles upon the website. Yeah, someone said their smiles make you not want to smile. Yeah, exactly. It's like very forced and it's like not welcoming and warm at all. So a lot of websites, and I'm using like an educational website as an example for this. So every website, even though they might be part of the same industry or the same category, they all have separate personalities. So Chegg is an example of a website that uses a lot of images of real people. So actually, if I go to their website, you can see sort of how much imagery they use in terms of like actual real life people. So like, as you can see, there's this guy at the top and they just scroll down. Oh, actually, I guess they changed the images, but yeah, they try to include a lot of images of people who are actually using their products to like really show the user or the potential customer who visits their website that like, oh, this is what you would look like if you use Chegg. So that's kind of like their personality when it comes to using images. And then the next example is Course Hero. So Course Hero, it kind of uses a very opposite approach. So it uses a lot of like icons and graphics, and they basically don't use any like real life people in their images. And so it has a more like modern feel to it, I would say. So they have like a lot more of a minimalist approach when it comes to images. And then lastly, this is one of my favorites, Slater. So this is also like an education website, right? But then when you first look at this design, you're like, oh wow, this is really funky and very like unusual and unconventional. But that kind of draws more attention to it, right? Like you're more excited about using this product because it's so different from the rest. And it's really not standard for an educational website. So yeah, as you can see, all three of these education companies, they have very different personalities, and it all comes down to the way they use images and graphics and icons. Okay, I'm gonna try and speed through the last few slides because I know we're sort of running out of time here. So the last main point I want to get across is accessibility. So like, I don't know if you noticed, but there's actually a text in the middle of the screen and it says, "Can you see me?" And you probably can't because it's so similar to the color of the background image. So contrast is really important if you want to get a point across in the text that's like on top of the background image. So this example of what like the text on top of an image would look without any additional styling. And then this is what it looks after. So we made the background image a bit darker so that it has more contrast with the white text on the top. And a more optimal way of placing the text upon the image is actually changing the size of the text so that it's bigger and positioning the text on top of a darker color section of the image instead of like having that at the middle. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize that we didn't have, or like we didn't cover the second part and it's almost 8. Okay, I'm gonna try and get through the second part as fast as possible. So basically when it comes to layouts, the F layout is a very, very common type of layout that a lot of websites use. And basically it kind of connects to like the way humans naturally read websites. They read from left to right and from top to bottom. So like in order of importance, the top left, whatever is in the top left of the website is the most significant. And then as you progress from like top to bottom, left to right, it gets less and less significant. So this is an example of like an F layout usage. So as you can see, the left side, because you read from left to right, right? So like the left is the most important part, and that's why they have the featured article on the left side. And then the nav bar is at the top because that's something that you also first notice. So they want to like make sure that you know how to navigate throughout the website. Even Google Drive uses kind of like the F layout. So as you can see, like the thumbnails at the very top, like that's sort of what you first notice. And then once your eyes move from top to bottom, you kind of see like the less important things. And then the nav bar is on the left side because you read from left to right. So there are some exceptions to the F layout, like it's not something that every website has to adhere to. Layouts that feature images on the top, navigation on the bottom or the sides are also becoming popular. Okay, actually these slides are originally going to be skipped, so I'm going to skip them now because we don't have enough time to cover everything. But essentially a content frame is like a space on your website where you have most of your content. So like for example, on Tumblr, there's a lot of negative space around it. And the content frame is what is, or like the content frame actually contains the post content and everything around that is just like nothing essentially. So it really draws attention to like what the main content of the website should be. At the end of the day, when it comes to layouts, it's really up to you to decide. You don't have to follow the rules. Like, as I said, F layout doesn't work for every single website out there, but for a majority of websites, it is pretty useful to follow just because of the way that humans naturally read content from like left to right and top to bottom. So here's some resources that you guys can use for images. Unsplash has really nice, high quality photos, but make sure to credit the photographers. Noun Project has a lot of icons for everything. They have SVG and PNG file types. Font Awesome and Flat Icon, they both have a lot of icons, a lot of library icons, or sorry, icon libraries. And so a lot of people tend to use these for their apps and their website designs as well. Okay, so I kind of sped through the last section really quickly because I wasn't keeping track of time really well, but do you guys have any questions about either of the two sections? Okay, if not, we'll take a 5-minute break now, and then we'll move on to the programming section of lecture.
I was stripping, you was stripping, who the pilot? Bet my bitch eat me up while I'm driving. And I swear, it's a shoot, not a riot. And I had a nightmare last night that I wasn't counting up. We had too many hoes in this bitch, I had to round them up. Like I had too many hoes in my face, I had to cut them off. I've been focused on my one-on-one. And I hope your pussy good as my bank account. But you said, bitch, can I break you off? Trunk waving at the mall. Hoes on
let me just, oh yeah, awesome. Okay, I will share my screen. Okay, so today in the programming portion, we will be talking about Flexbox, which is a really useful tool when it comes to positioning, especially when you have a lot of images in a layout, the way Julia talked about in her design lecture. So positioning things manually is a pain. And by that, we just mean that it takes a lot of effort to like shift something exactly where you want it, especially if you have like 20 items on a page. Okay. So just to remind you guys of the box model that we've been talking about for weeks now, the content, if you're using this picture frame analogy, is just the actual image in the frame. The padding is that white space that is sometimes between the image and the actual border of the picture frame. The border is pretty self-explanatory. It's just the like frame part itself. And then the margin is the space between the photos, like just the empty wall. It's not actually really considered part of the frame at all. All right. Another reminder, it's important to think of divs as containers in parent-child hierarchies. So you can see in this image, body is the parent of the child div, and div itself is the parent of the child header, and so on and so forth. And you can also think of pages this way. So you can see that there's the actual page that contains the navigation bar and this whole content area as its children. And then within this content area, there's the yellow boxes. And within this one yellow box, it just kind of keeps going and keeps going. But that's a pretty standard layout for a web page. So yeah, you can see the orange box contains these two yellow boxes side by side. And then this yellow box contains two blue block boxes that are stacked one on top of each other, and it keeps going. And this is also pretty clearly represented in the HTML. So you can see that there's the orange box over here, and just inside of it, there's yellow, inside of yellow, there's cyan, so on and so forth. But yeah, so we can just get started with what Flexbox really is, because it's a pretty useful tool. So let's say you have HTML that gives you like this red box and these blue boxes inside of it. Using CSS, we should be able to say whether the blue boxes should be arranged horizontally or vertically. Right now they're arranged vertically because they're stacked, but horizontally would have them just next to each other in a row. How much spacing should be in between boxes. So we can do that with margin, but if you're adjusting the margin of, yeah, like 50 items, then that might be a little too much. And then should the blue boxes be at the top or bottom of the red box? And that's just saying like here, they're kind of clumped at the top versus if they were down here, they'd be clumped at the bottom. All right, so we will learn how to make these different layouts using Flexbox just within this lecture. Okay, so this is a pretty confusing diagram, but this is pretty much what Flexbox is. It's a tool that we can use to align a parent element's children. So if you have a parent element or a container, like a Flex container, then the Flex items within it, these like lighter gray boxes with the numbers 1 and 2, you can kind of manipulate like what order they're in and whether they're next to each other or stacked. Just all of those things. And we do this by dealing with one main axis and one cross axis, so like a secondary axis. And you can see that right now the main axis is a horizontal one and the cross axis is a vertical one, but we can also switch these around using Flexbox. Okay, so the very first thing that you need if you're trying to use Flexbox in a page is just to specify display flex in the CSS and of the container. This is really important. You're not going to apply display flex to the children. You're going to apply it to the container. And one way that you can think of this logically is that if you had to apply it to the children, then you might have to like go in and type or copy paste display flex like hundreds of times. Whereas if you just apply it to the container, which is what you do, you just have to do it once and it'll like affect everything within that container. So yeah, just make sure you remember that because I think that can be a bit confusing. The next thing that you can put down is flex direction. Row is the default direction. So like child 1 and 2, if those are two boxes, they'll just be next to each other. But you can also do column. And I think, oh yeah, okay. So you can see it's flex direction row, so they're next to each other. And also there's row reverse. So instead of like before when child one was on the left and child two was on the right, because in the HTML code, child one comes before child two, row reverse will just flip those around. Yeah, and then there's column, meaning that instead of them being next to each other, it'll go top to bottom. And there's also column reverse if you want to reverse the direction and have it go ordered from bottom to top. Okay, so yeah, just like we saw in that Facebook example with the different boxes nested within each other, the children of Flex displays can also have the display of Flex, and then their children will also be affected by it. So kind of like the grandchildren of the original container. And I think the next slide will go into it. Yeah, so over here, best box is just this like white box, or like the blue line with the white inside of it. Each child is the like solid blue box. And then you can see within the children, there's these numbered boxes. And because we've put display flex and flex direction row, they're just ordered next to each other. Now, justify content is a third property that is really important in Flexbox layout. So if you do justify content, this will deal with the main axis. Right now, we're going by flex direction row, meaning it's a horizontal axis. So it's justified horizontally, and you can see it's in the center. Yeah, you can see these numbered boxes are centered within these solid blue boxes, which are called child. Space between is another thing you can use with justify content. This just maximizes the amount of space between the children in that like Flexbox layout. Another one is space around. Now, rather than maximizing the space just like between and not considering the borders of the children and the container, it's a bit more even. Okay, and here is a summary. Let me check on the time really quick. Okay, yeah, we're good. So yeah, you can see if you do flex start, it just kind of smushes the children to the beginning of the container. In this case, for Flexbox direction row, it'll be just to the left horizontally. Flex end, it'll be at the end. So at the right, centers in the center. Space between is maximizing the space in between the content. And then space around and space evenly might be a bit confusing, but you can think of it as space evenly, the space between all of the children as well as the borders of the container. Those are all the same. Whereas with space around, the space between the children, like a child and another child, is always the same, but the space between the border, so like the left and right borders and the children closest to it, are actually just half that like width. So space evenly is just more even. And here is a link that you can go to view just a bunch of these diagrams for Flexbox. Okay, so we talked about justify content. Now, align items deals with the other axis. So because we're in flex direction row right now, the main axis was horizontally. Now we're going to talk about align items for the secondary axis, which is vertically. So you can see we did align items center here, and it just centered the boxes vertically, the numbered boxes within the bigger blue boxes. And of course, there's flex start, which puts them just at the beginning, which on this axis would be the top. And then flex end, which puts them at the bottom. Again, here is a summary. It's just dealing with, like I said, the secondary axis. You can call it also the cross axis. Flex start is, at the top. Flex end is the bottom. Center is center. And there's also something called stretch, which just stretches the item to fill the entire container. And here is another link to diagrams. All right. Now, justify content and align items, you can combine it to just position things wherever you want it. In this example, you can see it's flex direction row. So we know main axis is horizontal, cross axis is vertical. Justify content, which deals with the main axis, says flex end. So you can think horizontally, it's going to be at the end. That's going to be at the right. And then align items, which is vertically, it's also flex end. So it's the right bottom. Now switching it around a bit, if justify content is space between, then like horizontally, you're maximizing the space between the numbered boxes, and align item center. Vertically, it's at the center of the blue boxes. Okay, Flexbox axes with flex direction row. Yeah, like we said, the main axis is horizontal, cross axis is vertical. And then with column, this just like rotates 90 degrees. So the main axis is top to bottom, and then the cross axis is left to right. Here is some practice. I will just go kind of show you this really quick demo. I think you can play around with it, but it's pretty self-explanatory. I don't think you'll have problems with it. Yeah, it'll just kind of prompt you to change different aspects of this. So instead of making a column, you're going to make it row, and see that it just switches around. So you can play with that in your own time, but we can get back to this presentation for now. Okay, and so coming up, I am going to do this demo about just kind of positioning things in this little Discord pop-up. It's going to start out a bit like this, and we want it to end up roughly like this. Not all the spacing is completely accurate, but as you can see here, you can think of this big box as a container with some padding in it, and then in here is like the content we're messing around with. And even within that, like we were talking about before, there's a nested container with children of like the Discord logo and some text here. There's that text, and then another container with two buttons that are aligned in a row. All right, so I'll just open that demo. Okay, let me share screen again, because that closed for some reason. All right, so we can see right now, this is what it looks like. That's not exactly what we want it to be. And we're already prompted over here to change some things. But the first thing that you should always do when you're given a problem like this is kind of identify what in the code matches up with what in the output. So over here, I can already see there's a container, and within that, a header, and this header just contains the image and the Lone Warrior text and the invite text. So that's these things up here. And then there's buttons, and that has accept and decline. All right, so let's first deal with the header, and the CSS, it's over here. I'll delete this commented out code. So it's already kind of obvious from this lecture, but display, we're gonna do flex because that's what we're learning right now. And right now the image is kind of stretched out. That's not what we want. So instead, what I'm thinking is we want it all to be like centered. We want it to fall along the same row. So I'll just put center over there. And yeah, like this example isn't perfect. There's a bit too much space between the text, but that's good enough for now. So now we can just deal with the buttons and getting them to be a bit more even. Again, we're just going to do display flex. And when it comes to justify content, we want it to be kind of spaced evenly within it. So right now I'm thinking just, actually, I think space between we can do first, because that can be good for like this kind of thing too. And then the buttons are also a bit too small. So I'm just going to increase the padding to 10 and 40, or maybe 10 and 45. And that works out pretty well. You can also do like space evenly, of course. And in that case, maybe I'll make the buttons a bit smaller. But yeah, you can just kind of see that was how we used flex with align items to align things this way, and then justify content, which aligns things this way, because we had it in the just like normal row setup. All right. So that was the demo. Here is another activity that you can find called Flexbox Froggy. I highly recommend it. I did the whole thing after I watched this lecture when I was a student, but it's just really good for kind of reinforcing and getting practice with different like Flexbox properties. Okay, and then here are some links and guides. The very first one has the images we've shown, like the orange and purple diagrams, which can be really helpful. And then there's also a few more just about Flexbox and helping you visualize it if you're maybe confused about the different axes or about what things like space between versus space evenly mean. And here is a real world application. This is from some previous instructors of the course. But yeah, display flex direction on friends. Not a real thing, but very funny. Okay, does anyone have any questions right now on any of the content? Or if you want me to go back to a few slides and repeat things. Okay, Jeffrey, what is your question?
Yeah, so I was wondering, are you able to like use flex boxes to like make multiple rows of like items?
Yes. Okay. So when it comes to multiple rows, and you can like see this in Flexbox Froggy, there's also something called Flex Wrap. So you can kind of tell it that if it like overflows the container's like width, that it just like wraps around. So yeah, you can do exactly that.
Okay, but is there also a way of like setting it so only like 3 items can be in the first row or something like that?
I think maybe if you set the containers like width to only allow there to be
Okay.
3, yeah, it'll like automatically do it for you.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions? Yeah, Wilson, it's a flex joke. Yes. Okay, yeah, it looks like there are no more questions. Feel free to interrupt me. Oh, okay, Wilson. How would you go about setting the width to 3 as you mentioned previously? So right now I'm just thinking, because your images are probably a certain width, if you know that each of them is like 100 pixels and there's a margin of like 20 between them, so it's like 40 like pixels between all of the images in a row total, then you can just do like 340, 341 as the width of the entire parent container. Oh yeah, and Jay said you can also use nested Flexbox containers. Yeah. Yes, very organizationally friendly. Okay. Any other questions? All right, yeah, I think we are probably done for the day. Yeah, feel free to pop up with a question or type one in the chat, even if like as we're kind of like shutting things down for today. Thank you for watching. Good luck with your midterm projects. Remember to come into office hours to get your design checked off. Okay, bye.